Hey everyone, welcome back to Those Coffee People podcast, where we explore the many ways coffee connects people, cultures, and opportunities. I'm your host today, Samuel, and today we're diving into one of the most exciting and flexible models in the coffee business, the coffee truck. My guest right now today is Vincent, the founder of Green Joe Coffee Truck. Not only does he run a successful mobile coffee business, but he's also dedicated to helping other entrepreneurs starting their own coffee trucks, sharing everything he's learned along the way. In this episode, we'll talk about the pros and cons of a coffee truck versus a traditional shop, the practical steps to get it started, and some insider tips you won't find in Google search. So, Vincent, welcome.
Thanks, Samuel. Thanks for having me.
Now, we are so excited to run this episode today with you. And just to begin, well, we were recently talking in our introductory call about your story. So, your story is really unique. It spans family heritage, military service, and eventually entrepreneurship. So, can you take us back to the beginning? I know the name Green Joe actually has a special meaning tied to your grandfather's journey. And yeah, can you share that story with us?
Yeah, sure. So Green Joe was named after a ship, the Giuseppe Verde. And the Giuseppe Verde was a transatlantic passenger ship from Naples, Italy to Ellis Island. And it ran during the early 20s and 30s. And basically it brought over Italian immigrants from Italy to Ellis Island. So when I was trying to figure out what the name of my business was going to be, I was sitting on a whole bunch of different ideas, but really what I kept coming back to was this concept of chasing the American dream. And for me, that's what it really rang home about, is I felt like this was my grandfather trying to chase his dream, driving past the Statue of Liberty, going through Ellis Island, and going on to becoming an immigrant into a new nation. And it just really resonated with me. The migrant story in general really resonates with me. So when I named the business, I was like, well, that was his vessel that he used to chase the American dream. And this is my vessel that I use to chase the American dream. So I named Green Joe after that ship. And originally we started as Green Joe Coffee Truck. And we ran the coffee truck. The first original one we ran for about 5 years. And then we ended up getting another, 2 years into that, we got another coffee truck and then some coffee carts and eventually did a brick and mortar. But in 2019, it's our 6th year in consulting. In 2019, I put out a book on how to open up coffee trucks. And that was the beginning of Green Joe Coffee School. So we have slowly been moving over to the rebranding of Green Joe Coffee School with the concept of educating people on how to get into the mobile coffee, specifically mobile carts, trucks, and trailers.
That is so inspiring, actually, to connect both the heritage from your grandfather's American story, dream, and connected it with your dream right now. So now that we are talking about coffee trucks, instead of opening a traditional coffee, you chose the coffee truck route. You mentioned before that it was kind of hard to begin with because you didn't have that information. But the question there, what made you decide a coffee truck? Why was it the best way to start?
Yeah, great question. For me, it really came down to the finances and the experience. I mean, I was coming from being a paramedic at the time. I had spent some time on the 911 system here in Albuquerque, and I didn't have the entrepreneurial experience. I certainly didn't have the 50, 60 grand to launch a coffee shop. And so it was kind of a necessity thing. I said, well, I want to get into coffee, but I don't have the funds nor the experience to launch this huge coffee shop. Why don't we start off with maybe a trailer and see how that goes first? And that's kind of a medicine thing, in medicine, if someone's not breathing right, you go, okay, well, let me start off by putting a little oxygen on them before you just start intubating them. You go, let's just start off a little slow and see what happens. So with that, let me start off coffee trailer and see how that works. And if that works well, then I'll reinvest into a coffee shop along the way. So it was out of necessity on my end.
Okay, so what challenges or unexpected realities have you faced that new entrepreneurs might not think about when coming to a coffee truck?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I think my challenges might be different than a new a new entrepreneur because I started this 11, 12 years ago. And back then, there wasn't very much resources online. I got started. If I wanted to know about restaurant equipment, I had to dig into restaurant forums to find out about the espresso equipment. I was digging through barista forums to find out about food trucks and how to set those up. It was food truck forums. So it was a lot of resourcing and trying to kind of reach out. And that's really why I started that first book was like, okay, you know, it was a big pain in the butt for me to look into all these different areas. Why don't I create a resource where people can just go find all the information at once? So that was the big problem that I face, but I think it's going to be the opposite. I think what new entrepreneurs will face is information overload. I think they won't know where and when or who to pick their information from. And the reason for that is I see a lot of first-year coffee truckers or coffee cart business owners giving advice. Unfortunately, the problem with that is, you know, it's their first year. So they really haven't had any experience yet on how to build their business. And so whether or not and I'm sure their advice is well-intended, but sometimes that can be a costly mistake. Espresso machines are a good example of that. Espresso machines are one of those things you buy nice or buy twice. And sometimes people are tempted to buy an espresso machine that's a little bit on the lower budget, the less cost, because, you know, they're starting up with a little bit of money. And so they're trying to save money where they can. And this is one of those places where I'm like, if you got the extra money, you should probably spend it. Because the problem with a poor espresso machine is it creates poor product. It may not do it on the first shot, but when you have, you know, a line of 10 back to back for hours on end, the drinks will eventually start to go bad. And the reality is most people won't tell you. They'll just walk away with a bad drink and never come back, you know, unfortunately. These first-year entrepreneurs don't know that. And the only way they find that out is through, you know, not seeing the same amount of sales come the next year, of course. So I think that the new entrepreneurs coming into this industry, their hard part is going to be trying to find credible information, especially with AI, because AI is just a regurgitation. It's just echoing what people are saying online. And if you have good SEO skills, you can say anything you want. And so, you know, AI isn't distinguishing that information. So I think that's going to be the hardest part for new folks is deciding for themselves what's credible and what's not.
Yeah, that is something that only experience can actually, and when it comes to the equipment necessary for espresso in this case, yeah, it really makes the change.
It does.
So, yeah, that really brings up the next question in this case. So, we were talking about investment equipment. So, what would you say? What kind of initial investment should someone realistically expect when it's starting a coffee truck?
Yeah, it just kind of depends. So there's a few different ways to look at it. And really, the two main bottlenecks on that decision are going to be menu and where they're starting their coffee trailer. Because if you're starting your coffee trailer, your truck in a rural area where your local health county isn't very strict, then you can probably get away with certain things that folks in Los Angeles and Seattle and New York aren't going to be able to get away with. So the rules and regulations or the health code that's provided by the state and the county are kind of the underlying rules that we have to work by. And that's usually our first bottleneck is just kind of getting through that. That's the gatekeeper. And so these rules and regulations will dictate equipment. So they'll say, hey, you either need to have a triple sink or you don't need to have a triple sink. You need to have this plumbing or you don't need to have this plumbing. So that's bottleneck number one. And then bottleneck number two is the menu. So if, you know, when you and I speak of coffee, we automatically assume that we're talking about espresso and latte drinks as well. But the health department kind of makes a line for that. They look at milk as a different product than coffee. So, and that's why, like, if you've ever been to like a mechanic shop or something, they'll have a coffee pot in the corner. Well, It's because coffee by itself is pretty shelf stable. It's not a very doesn't have a very high potential for going bad. But milk, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. Milk goes bad pretty dang quickly, and when it does go bad, it stinks to high heaven. And of course, if you were to pour it down the drain, then it's going to clog up your drains. So the health department knows that it has all these risks associated with it. And so whenever you add milk to the menu, you're going to add a layer of complexity to that trailer. One is the menu. What's your menu? And then two is where are you starting this truck? So typical coffee carts, if you go to build a coffee cart by yourself, it maybe cost about $1,000 to build it by yourself. Maybe. If you go to buy one, they start at about $2,500. And then, there's a bunch of accessories that you have to worry about that, the equipment and whatnot. A trailer, if you build a trailer by yourself, trailers cost anywhere to build it out about 15 to 20 grand. Once you go to buy them, the used ones start at about 30 grand, and then a brand new one's closer to about 50. And then when you talk about trucks, it's pretty much the same number plus whatever engine. So if you go to buy a Mercedes engine, then you got to tack on the 50 grand that Mercedes engines cost, versus if you're going to buy a Dodge Sprinter van, it would be less. So trucks are definitely the more expensive route. People tend to gravitate towards them because they like the idea of just kind of getting in and starting the truck and going to where they need to be. I like that idea too. I've had a coffee truck. I can completely relate to that. However, it's usually not what I end up recommending. Usually for most folks, it's either a coffee cart, or a coffee trailer, just kind of depending on their resources. So, that can go anywhere from a couple grand all the way up to 30 grand, I would say, so for some folks that are just starting off, they probably have to start off with a cart because they may not have the money to throw 30 grand at something. Sometimes people are, retiring or something, and they're looking for a second career. And so to them, the 30 grand isn't a huge deal, especially if they're going to get it back. So yeah, so it just kind of depends on where you're starting from and what you want to put on your menu, like how much work you're willing to do.
I can see that. There are many specifications to begin with when you're thinking to start with this
Yeah.
business. Here's my next question in this case. What are some of the most common mistakes that you see a new coffee shop owner make?
Yeah. That's a great question. The number one, there's kind of it's a two answer. I'm going to give you two answers if that's okay. I think what most people do is they assume they're going to make a whole bunch of money, and they assume that it's not going to cost them a whole bunch of money, right? So they underestimate their expenses and they overestimate their profit, which is a recipe for disaster. So that's number one rule of business is to do the opposite. Underestimate your profit and overestimate your expenses. But that being said, I see a lot of folks that go belly up because they get loans. Basically, they'll take out a loan to get the coffee truck instead of building up their business over time. And the problem with that is, business is slow in the beginning, takes time to build up. We came out of the gate running. We did 100K our first year, but I don't think we're a very good case study for what other people do. I've been coaching now for about 6 years. And in the beginning, it's slow. Business is slow. You got to build your name. It takes time to get your name out there. And if you have a loan, a car loan or a truck loan or a trailer loan or a business loan, something like that, to get this business started, then those bills, they're due on day one. And so you can't guarantee that you're going to make a lot of money out of the gate. But when you get a loan, you absolutely guarantee that you're going to get a lot of bills out the gate. And so I think that's how people can get themselves into a lot of hot water there is, if you have we'll just say an easy car loan at, 30 grand, and you're making payments of, $600 a month or something like that to pay off this coffee trailer. Then once you add your insurance in and your cost of goods, the insurance is another couple $100. We'll just say $300 for easy math, and your cost of goods. And then of course your commissary and all your monthly expenses, you're going to have to make $2 grand before you even see your first dollar. So if you're jumping into this full time and you're wanting to take over your monthly budget of $4 grand that you're used to making from your day job, well, that means you got to make $6,000 right out the gate. And most people don't come out of the gate swinging at $6,000 a month. It takes time to build that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to take a few months. So if you're operating in the red for a few months and you already started off with low money, that's why you got the loan, then you can very easily get yourself into some hot water. So I think that's the biggest mistake that I see most new entrepreneurs get themselves into. They want to rush. They want to, they see these coffee trucks and coffee trailers, and they of course they go, oh, okay, I want to buy that. But my coffee trailer took me years to start. And so it's, it's just patience, of course. It's like, well, if you don't have the 30 grand right away, start off with a cart, get some experience, get good quality equipment so that when you upgrade to the trailer, you'll already have, good stuff. And then that way, when you do upgrade, you'll have a cart as well. So you can do indoor catering if you want to. So usually that's the advice I give to folks starting off is, just start off slow, build it over time. It's a lot easier to kind of get started that way, and it's a lot less risky.
Well, and besides patience, I would say to have someone who knows about the business. And that's when you come here with Green Joe Coffee School. You've taken like all the experience and turned it into something valuable for others. Courses for people who want to launch their own trucks. So I have here 2 questions. I will ask them along the way. Maybe they are really connected. The first one is, what can someone expect to learn if they take one of your courses? And the second one is, do you have a favorite success story of someone who came through your program and launched their own truck?
Yeah. Definitely. We got hundreds of success stories. That one's the easier one. It just depends. When someone first comes to me, the first thing I do is I usually give them just a free step-by-step checklist. Look, this is what you're getting yourself into. Here's the roadmap. Take a look at the map. It's not the easiest of journeys here, so this is what you're getting yourself into. And that way people can kind of get a global understanding on the challenges they're about to take on. Then from there, our introduction classes is just learning about whether or not their idea is profitable. It's as simple as that. So before I even show someone how to do anything, my first step is making sure they're going to be able to make a living. That's step number 1. So that course is like, calculating your cost of goods and running the numbers on your monthly expenses and, estimating your profit projection over a year based upon your business model. Like, it's simple things, but it's hard to do because you got to get out there and actually crank these numbers. So that's step number 1. And before I take anyone on as a student in one of my advanced classes, they have to go through that pipe first. Because in the past, I've ran into folks that haven't calculated their numbers, only come to, find out later on that it really snipped them in the butt. Anyone that's worked in a coffee shop, they know it's a whole lot easier to put a lid on than it is to clean a spill. So let's just prevent the spill from happening by putting the lid on. Then once someone's gone through our entry-level courses, then we have 4 different pathways they can take, whether or not they're building or buying. Some people don't want to build a cart. They would just want to buy it or, and then whether or not they're doing a truck or a trailer. And so that's more of the how to do it, So those are what I would call our mid-level classes. And then we have a higher level class for people that are already in business and they're looking on scaling their business. So it just kind of depends on where they are in their journey. For some folks that are just, this is an idea they're cranking, take a look at the free step-by-step checklist, see what you're getting into. For folks that haven't ran the numbers on the idea, you got to run the numbers. And then for folks that are like, okay, I think this is going to work, then we have a 12-step program for how to launch. Everything from submitting information to your health department, to floor plans, to equipment purchase, to calculating your wattage, things that are necessary for that. And then as far as, people that have launched, we just had Get Up and Joe launched 2 weeks ago. She launched. Ray Coffee just launched. His Word Coffee just launched. But we got a whole bunch of successful companies that have launched out of our school. We usually launch, on average, probably 3 a month is what we're launching. So that's our class and kind of our pipeline on how we do our education. So yeah, that's what someone can expect with going into our school. The areas where we need to grow. There's a few areas that we need to grow that we're working on. One of the areas is in our education of coffee production. So I'm phenomenal at showing people how to start businesses, and I'm great at showing people how to scale their business. That's no problem. But in terms of like finding your roaster, understanding the quality of the coffee production, how the farmers are being treated, how the commerce takes place, that's an area of growth for us. That's something that we want to continue our education with, because for us, coffee really equates to community. I really enjoy the aspect of giving people the freedom to have their own business. And I also enjoy the aspect of connecting people along the way. We have our connections that we've done with our roasters and our good folks in Colombia, and they've been absolutely wonderful. But I think that's one of the areas that I'd like to chase a little bit further is, showing people a little bit more about the bean itself, how it's grown, where it's grown, the people that grow it, the lifestyle of the people that grow it, those type of things. That's the good stuff.
That is so great. Yeah, I totally get it. Finally, before we wrap up, let's give our listeners a way to connect with you. So if someone is ready and is listening to take the next step towards starting their own coffee truck, what's the best way to reach to you or just learn more about you?
Sure. I mean, step number one, just go to the website.
Go to the website.
There's a free step-by-step checklist there. It's great. It's worth its money because it's free. So just go get the checklist. It really helps kind of get an understanding on what it takes to launch that dream. That's probably the best way to kind of get into our pipeline. Then from there, you'll get emails from us, just making sure that, you got the checklist and seeing if there's any questions and stuff. And so that's usually what I would encourage students to do. There's a bunch of Facebook groups out there too. I encourage people to just look around. When I got started in the industry, there was not a lot of information, and that actually turned out to be a great blessing for me because it made me dig into the education component of it. But for folks that are just getting started, I think it's important to, hear what I have to say, but also go take a listen to what some other folks have to say. There's some really good sources out there. And so it's important to just get a well-rounded education, I think. At the same time, just, also be careful on who you're getting your education from. And in terms of like, have they been established? Like anything else, you want to make sure that this person has kind of been around for a while and that they've been practicing what they preach, like any other good, coach or consultant. That's what I would say. Grab the free step-by-step checklist. I think that one's pretty good. I got questions for you guys.
Okay. Let me hear.
Okay. Yeah. How did you guys find me?
Well, we have our team in the marketing side. So one of them found about coffeepreneurs we were interested in to get into the podcast. And we found you. I mean, it was like something out of the common. We recently found just coffee shops, roasteries, and they are really cool. They have all stories, really interesting stories to tell about. But we were like, come on, coffee trucks? We need to get that here to talk about and learn more. And that is something new. I mean, I really expect this podcast and everyone who is listening to it and is interested, get in touch with you and learn more about other ways to bring coffee to the world.
Yeah, I mean, coffee trucks. I used to teach this. It was a history of coffee class. Wonderful class to teach. It was a really fun class to research. And in this class, as we followed the migration of coffee from Ethiopia to Yemen, up through the Hajj to eventually Istanbul, and then of course throughout the world, we would try the different coffees from these different regions. But one of the beautiful things about coffee was how it was able to penetrate the different social classes. It wasn't just for the rich. It was for the working class. It was for the poor. It was for the spiritual. It was for everyone. And that was the beautiful thing about coffee. From the very beginning, it was about community. And the major influence to the spread of coffee and how coffee spread just phenomenally throughout the world, exponentially throughout the world, was along this Hajj trade route where people were heading to the Mecca for their spiritual journey. And so in the beginning, I mean, coffee was mobile. It's been mobile from day one, It started off.
Yeah.
Eventually they put it in coffee shop. But I always.
Yeah, no, totally. We totally understand how important it is for the coffee to bring together communities. And that is one of the reasons we are here in this podcast today. So, yeah, thank you so much, Vincent, for sharing this amazing story. It is just, that's amazing. It's just inspiring. So, if you have any last words?
That's it. Those are the ones. It has been good. Thank you so much for having me on this one. And yeah,
Yeah, Binjo. So, yeah, thank you so much for listening. And we'll see you next time in our next podcast. Bye bye. Have a good day.
all right. Bye-bye.